Well, hey everybody, it's Sandy and welcome back to my channel dedicated to helping you advocate for your own health one topic at a time. So guys, today I want to talk about the tips that I've cultivated over the years to deal with my sweet tooth. And if you want to hear what I do, just keep watching. Yeah, so don't worry, it's not my intent at all to get on YouTube here when the holidays are upon us and be a complete buzzkill and say don't have any sweets. So I've said before on my channel that I have a sweet tooth. And I've even shared a couple of my favorite recipes. I'll link those. Those are things that will satiate a sweet tooth without creating too much inflammation or too much of a sugar rush. So I've decided to put this video together and share with you 5 simple tips that I've used. And most of these are about incorporating and not excluding. So I'll go through these 5 things. And after that, I want to also talk about how being gluten-free has affected my consumption of sweets. So most of these tips, as I said, are about things that I've added, not taken away. So I'm going to start with those. And the first thing is I became a coffee drinker. Now, I'm not recommending you become a coffee drinker. There are all kinds of reasons that you might not want to be a coffee drinker. Coffee is really mixed. In some ways, it seems that it's very beneficial because it's got a lot of antioxidants from the beans. People with various arrhythmias or high blood pressure have to limit their coffee. So this is something you need to talk about with your own provider if you have any underlying conditions. I did find that becoming a coffee drinker started to dial back my sweet tooth. And it's interesting because I wasn't looking to do that, but I noticed after I started drinking coffee that my sweet tooth got dialed back. Ironically, I started drinking coffee the way a lot of people do, where you have these sweet drinks that are sort of coffee flavored, right? Like the stuff you'd get at Starbucks. You know, it's more like a malt or a milkshake with a little bit of coffee flavor in it. But interestingly, I just noticed that I actually loved the flavor of coffee. And it really made sense to me because even when I was a kid, I liked the flavor. I liked coffee ice cream. I liked hard candies that were coffee flavored. Once I started drinking things like lattes, I found that I could slowly get rid of the milk and more quickly get rid of the sweet. I personally like a dark roast, sometimes a medium. I don't like it so dark that it's smoky, that burnt sort of scent and flavor. I think that if you're just getting used to coffee, that might be something that repulses you and then you just never want to try it again. So I don't recommend going too dark. But in general, I think that it's the darker, more rich coffees that have the better potential to sort of dial back a sweet tooth. I think I started with Illy, but I don't drink that all the time because it's just so expensive. But once I realized the depth, the complexity, and the intensity of really good quality coffee, first of all, I realized how much I liked it, but I noticed just as a consequence that it started to dial back my sweet tooth. Now I became a big fan of a single serve coffee brewer, so I have a Keurig. I kind of understand how people don't want to create all the waste of the disposable pods, but a French press is another good idea. It's like 1 or 2 servings. I don't really like anything that just sits on a pot on a burner all day. Like I was never really interested in the coffee that was on the burner at work in that drip coffee maker. I guess I did become a bit of a coffee snob kind of quickly. So if you're not already a coffee drinker, I would recommend just exploring that. And if you are already a coffee drinker, but you're not drinking really good coffees, I recommend experimenting and trying to figure out like a good quality coffee. I don't feel like I need, 2-3 cups. When I have a cup of, really good quality coffee, it's very satisfying. Now, if regular caffeinated coffee is not an option for you and you need to go with a decaf option, then I recommend looking at a couple different things. First of all, the process by which it's decaffeinated. Now, there are 2 different methods for decaffeinating coffee. One is a process that uses formaldehydes. It does preserve the flavor a lot better, but I personally don't think it can possibly be good for your health to be drinking something that is processed with formaldehydes. Most of that is washed off in the process of decaffeinating the coffee, but there's just some controversy that has arisen over that. And because of that, there's another method for decaffeinating coffee, and that is the Swiss water soak. And so the beans are soaked and the caffeine leaches out of them, and there's no chemical process involved. The flip side of that is that with the Swiss water soak, it does rob some of the intensity of flavor. So it's really hard to find a Swiss water soak decaffeinated coffee that has an intense dark flavor. I have found that the best thing to do if that's what you need is to go to the espressos, the decaf like espressos, Nespresso brand. Of course, then you're using certain pods in a particular machine, but Nespresso brand's decaf line is all Swiss water soak. Peet's Coffee actually has a Swiss water soak decaf brand. You can buy those in K-cup pods, or you can buy the beans or the ground coffee. So that's something to look at. It's pretty dark. It's not as dark as I would like, but it's really good for a decaf coffee, in my opinion. Yeah, so incorporating coffee into my life, I found dialed back my sweet tooth quite a bit. Tip number 2 is dark chocolate. The darker the better. So maybe you don't like chocolate, go on to tip number 3. I personally like chocolate. I have loved chocolate my whole life. Again, I never incorporated dark chocolate into my life planning for it to have any particular impact on my sweet tooth. I was introduced to dark chocolate by my very beloved late aunt, who I miss so much. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about her. And I used to love to cook with her in the kitchen. And I remember one day we were just in the middle of our afternoon, and she reached up in the cabinet and she sort of had, it was almost stashed. She had this little candy bar, dark chocolate bar, stashed like sideways next to her dishes. And she took it down and she took out a couple squares for herself and handed me a couple of squares. And she said, you know, I like the dark. It's very satisfying. And I never thought about it. I mean, I was young. I always ate like junk chocolate, right? Milk chocolate. Now I can't even stand the taste of that. But I noticed that she was right. The bitter chocolate really does satisfy the sweet tooth. It's extremely intense, and you really only need a very little bit of it. Not too many years after that, we started hearing about the antioxidants in chocolate and the dark chocolate having some health benefits. So I embraced that. And it's funny because I noticed years later that I actually had a tendency to stash my chocolate exactly the same way. I'd have a bar up in my cabinet, like sideways next to some other things. I don't know who I was hiding it from, but now I always have bars of dark chocolate around the house. So one brand that I really like is Endangered Species. Now this one is espresso beans in dark chocolate, and this is a 72%. I don't go any lower than 72%. Now Endangered Species makes a whole line of chocolate bars. Now some of them are milk chocolate. I don't try those, but I'll have 72%. I think they have an 80 or an 82, and they do have an 88, and that is quite intense. It's not for the faint of heart. Okay, it's not somewhere to start. But yeah, dark chocolate is my second recommendation to incorporate into your life if you're trying to satiate yet dial back your sweet tooth. So tip number 3 is a little bit of a departure from the deep, dark coffee, dark chocolate world, and that is dates. Now, I'm not talking about dried dates in the package that are just really hard, and those aren't very satiating anyway. Fresh dates, in my opinion, especially medjool dates, are one of the best ways to satiate your sweet tooth without overdoing a glycemic load for 2 reasons. First of all, they don't tend to spike your blood sugar. There was a study done that I talked about in a previous video where some researchers fed diabetics dates and more dates and more dates and more dates, and they couldn't get anybody's blood sugar to spike. Now, I'm not recommending that. I'm not recommending anybody go overboard. And if you are diabetic, I recommend that you follow whatever the advice is of your practitioner and that you're checking your blood sugars as you should. But in my experience, dates are not going to provide that kind of spike in the blood sugar, and yet they are very sweet and satisfying to the palate. The other thing is that fresh dates, like medjool dates, are very chewy. There's a certain texture to them that really satisfies the sweet tooth. And I noticed that dates and chocolate really intensify and enhance each other. So hence mine. The 4th tip I have is something that I've incorporated into my oral hygiene routine, and that is a preparation of essential oils. This one is called Aura Restore. There was one I used to use years ago called Aura MD. And I believe this is exactly the same formula. So I think Aura MD was acquired by this company called Great Oral Health. And I will link something in the description box. It's a mixture of essential oils, a sweet almond oil, spearmint oil, peppermint oil, and it basically has the flavor of a very intense toothpaste. It's meant to be put on as a treatment. Now, the instructions for using this recommend either of 2 options. One is you use it with a toothbrush and apply it to your teeth. I don't do that. The other one is that you apply it at the gum line after you're done with your oral hygiene routine, whatever that is. And that's what I do. I just get a couple of drops of this on my finger and I rub it along where the teeth meet the gums. I do the top, outer, and inner, and the bottom, outer, and inner. And just like toothpastes or other dental hygiene products that leave like a minty flavor, but this one lasts because this is an oil. So it actually stays there, and it's apparently very good for your oral health. I have good checkups anyway, so I don't know, whether I'm going to be able to tell like any kind of a difference, but the mint oils are profoundly antimicrobial. So unlike the aqueous solutions like mouthwashes and toothpastes that we spit out, this is supposed to sit there and help contribute to good gum health by discouraging the growth of microbes at the gum line. Well, that fresh minty flavor in my mouth also, I find, tends to reduce the sweet tooth. So if there's ever some time where I really have a sweet tooth and I don't have anything, I don't want anything right now, this is something that I'll just go do even if I'm in between brushes. And then finally, tip number 5, which is sort of a broad one, so I've left it for last, and that is intermittent fasting. Now, intermittent fasting is way too big to be doing just to solve your sweet tooth problem. It's a real big lifestyle change for most people. I have been intermittent fasting for like 9 years. Early on when I started this channel, I did some videos on intermittent fasting. If somebody wants me to talk about them more, because I feel like I really didn't know how to do a video back then, not that the information wasn't good, but it's a topic that I love, I'm passionate about, and I love helping people with it. So if people want to hear me talk more about my intermittent fasting journey, tips and things like that, let me know and I will do that. It's beyond the scope of this video. But I did notice after a very short period of intermittent fasting that my sweet tooth was dialed down a bit. Now, I don't think it's because it directly dials down the sweet tooth. My theory is that that has to do with another result of intermittent fasting that's a little more broad, and that is that in general, you find when you begin intermittent fasting that your food tastes so much more flavorful. I do remember that foods in general tasted so much more intense. So anything strong tasted stronger. Anything sweet tasted way sweeter. So almost too sweet. So after years of intermittent fasting, for example, I really can't see myself like ever having a Twinkie, even if I could. But I think that things just taste more intense. So those are the 5 tips. But I do also want to talk about the fact that I have been on a gluten-free diet for over 10 years, I think 11 years now. I can't say that being on a gluten-free diet has dialed back my sweet tooth, not at all. But even before I had incorporated all these other things, and even before I was intermittent fasting, it changed my intake of sweets for a variety of reasons, and I'm going to talk about that. First of all, I'm not recommending anybody goes on a gluten-free diet. People have some very strong opinions about whether people who are not celiac should be off of gluten. I don't want to tell anybody what to do. I will tell you my opinion is that while it might not be harming you, if you're not celiac, you don't need to be on a gluten-free diet. There is no doubt in my mind that gluten is a potentially inflammatory substance. And for a lot of people, it's very inflammatory. Most people give up gluten kicking and screaming. I did. But I can honestly say that and intermittent fasting are 2 of the very best things I've ever done for myself. So very indirectly, going off gluten really did decrease my intake of things like sweets. And here's why. Because when you go off gluten, it really means that you kind of have to plan your meals. There was no more of this going to work and thinking, well, I don't really need to bring my lunch. If everybody's ordering, I'll order something out. Or if there's always something in the break room if you need a snack, and then I'll just eat when I get home. Well, the kinds of things that are in the break room if you need a snack are like crackers and, cookies and munchies and things that are laden with gluten. And ordering out is a whole other thing. What I found is that I had to start really thinking in advance, packing my lunch, bringing anything I was going to need with me for the day. And that sounds like a real pain, but it turned out to be so liberating. I never again went and had crackers in the break room or ate like a donut because I just didn't bring anything and I was so hungry. And I only ate what I had with me, and I brought with me anything I would need. And what I noticed is that on other occasions, like not at work, if I wanted to splurge and have, something, not gluten, I don't ever splurge like that. But if I wanted to have something that, let's say something sweet, or let's say, whatever it is. Well, my whole week when I was at work wasn't filled with dietary indiscretions that I would have to then try to make up for on the weekend. So it just really helped. So there was no like mindless eating. That went away. But I also think that it's not going to hurt anybody to try going off gluten and see what happens. Now, going off gluten in and of itself does not at all negate the opportunity to eat all kinds of things that are carby and sweet. It's possible to say I'm going off gluten now, but then I'm going to buy all kinds of substitutes like gluten-free pancakes, gluten-free cookies, gluten-free cake mixes, all the things that would normally have gluten in them, and now you're buying the substitutes that are gluten-free. Yeah, don't do that, because you're going to be eating a lot more sugar, you're going to be eating a lot more carb, okay, because those are made with things like rice flours, and there's going to be a lot more carb per unit volume. You're also going to be eating a lot more calories that way, so a lot of people go on these gluten-free diet and then they gained weight because they're eating all these gluten-free substitute everything. No, the trick is that you're going to get rid of those things almost entirely, and having like a cookie or something, a gluten-free pizza crust or something, that's an occasional, and that's kind of a splurge, but it's not part of your normal routine. It also becomes pretty expensive to do that, so I really don't recommend it. So I found that the trick with going off gluten was going off those kinds of things. Gluten is largely just a cheap filler, so you'd be surprised how close you come to a really whole foods diet if you get rid of all that. You're getting rid of a whole lot of processed stuff right off the bat if you get rid of gluten. I'm sure, there are many more tips. As the day goes on, I'll think about other things I might have said. Lots of people have lots of tips for this. I'd be interested in hearing what you guys do, or if you think any of these you might try. And let me know how it works out. And until next time, be well. Bye-bye.